Today, we discuss RB tiers, how the RB landscape has changed with this RB superclass that just infused the league with some exciting new prospects. We'll talk where they sit into the tier of veterans, tier up, tier down strategy, all that and more. And welcome into the Dyno Construction podcast. Got the band together again this week, Justin with David and JP. We have hit that 500 subscriber mark actually a little while ago. Just have been a little busy, haven't had us all together on the podcast kind of to celebrate yet. We're going to have one last mega thread down below that if you guys comment with the first RB you remember having on a fantasy football team, for me it is Nick Chubb. Rookie year. Actually, I guess Carlos Hyde. I had him first. I drafted him ahead of Nick Chubb. But comment below in order to enter to win a roster review. So we would love to see that. We'll also pick everybody from comments from previous videos who have entered for roster review through that as well. So that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, we're going to dive into RB strategy right away. And before we even get into tiers, just want to ask you guys, I'll go JP first, then David, how has this infusion of RBs, the recursion of greatness for some guys, Saquon and Henry, etc., Mixon. How has this changed the RB landscape and how you're approaching it in fantasy football, dynasty fantasy football?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely different with how we saw the old guys perform. I think I was a little bit more closed-minded that these guys, that they're already slowing down. But when you have a guy that's been great for a long time, we haven't seen the signs of slowing down, and we know they're in a great situation, a la Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry. We know they're in great offenses. I'm just not going to fade those guys. And that's why we're going to talk about a couple old guys today. And I thought that they both belonged in a tier. We had a discussion. And that's the reason why, is because we saw last year how well those old guys perform when they are in those good situations. So I just think that maybe we had that period of time where guys were falling off at 27 years old, but I think it's because a lot of them weren't these like Hall of Fame level Derrick Henry CMC types. So yeah, I think that I'm really more open-minded to those older guys because I was pretty against it last offseason.
David, maybe talk a little more about how the young guys have changed your strategy.
But I can't talk about old guys too?
We're too old to talk about them. They're all young to us, right? Except for Henry.
I feel so old. Henry's still young to me. I'd take that. I will say on them real quick, I do think JP kind of touched on it. The fact that that incredible class of 2017, 2016, whatever it was, is finally hitting this age, that maybe this is kind of an anomaly because that whole class is one. So I don't know if the age cliff is necessarily shifting or we're just seeing that group come through it and exceeding expectations like they have every step of the way so far. As for big picture running back, I will say I don't think my strategy has changed towards the bottom of the group. I still love, any RB on a 53 on my depth chart. I love, not being over invested in the position still, but I'm much more open to the idea of some of these top-end young players being core assets on my roster. I used to always want to trade them if I had them. I was worried about, value insulation and all that. And I think we've gotten to the point where, yeah, he would take a hit, but like if Bijan tore his ACL in training camp, he'd probably still be, if not a tier 1 running back going into next year, he'd be tier 2, I would guess. So I think at the top, I'm a little more comfortable having some high investments. Most of the concerns stay, I don't want too many old guys. I don't want a ton of young running backs or too much value, but kind of think you need one of these top guys these days, at least one of them. So shifting more towards liking running backs more than I used to, but I would not call myself a running back fan yet.
Yeah, I think the market has changed quite a bit. Going to be interesting to talk a little bit about those tier 1 guys and how we view them in team building strategy a little bit when we get into the tiers momentarily. For me, I kind of agree with what David's saying there about these rookie RBs that are on 4-year contracts in situations that we like. You can kind of view them as a cornerstone-esque asset at this point, something that we haven't had much opportunity to do in the past. We probably should have done that with Gibbs when he came in. We did with Bijan at the time. But with those guys in their rookie years, what David was saying, I personally also look to move off of those guys to pivot to wide receiver. I don't necessarily regret that I did. Like I pivoted off of a Bijan to add to him to get to Justin Jefferson. Not a bad move, right? But I do think there's something to be said about having an RB1 for a 3 or 4 year window, or an high-end RB2 for a 3 or 4 year window in a guy like a Henderson, a Hampton, a Judkins could be that type of guy. So I'm more interested in investing in the RB position than I have been in the past because because of the value shifts and the liquidity that these guys now have. That being said, let's go ahead and start moving into our tiers. And I'm going to have JP go ahead and define what is a tier 1 running back before David reads them off.
Yeah, our tier 1 running backs are going to be guys that are still very young, and we also expect to be RB1s this season. David, who do we got here?
Yeah, this one's pretty easy. I think most people are in lockstep with us. They might have it a 2-man tier, but our 3-man tier, we've got Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and the rookie Ashton Jeanty.
So 2 questions I want to talk about price-wise for these guys. I want to look at them in a pick. So how many first are they worth perspective? And I also want to look at them in a startup value. Should they be going before the 202? Which is usually, very often I see all these guys off the board by around the 202, 203, something like that. Are we comfortable taking them on the 1-2 turn and building a team like that? So starting off with that question, are we comfortable? I'll go David first, then JP. Taking these guys on the 1-2 turn, one of them. I don't think any of us are trying to take both of them and go crazy RB testosterone.
I can't do it. I still can't do it. Like in a startup, I'd much rather get a quarterback or a receiver in that range. If one falls to me and like I'm, middle into the second, yeah, of course you got to take that value. The way that I want to capitalize on the value shift at the position that we're seeing is by trading these guys if I already have them, or trying to acquire them cheap, which is hard to do with these 3 specifically. But as we get into some of these other younger guys that we like, 1-2 turn, that's just crazy to me. The market shift is kind of why I'm shifting my mind. So maybe I'm a little behind still. I don't know. It just feels too weird. I can't pull the trigger personally.
Yeah, I think right when it enters the second round is when I'm comfortable doing it. I think there's about 8 quarterbacks I for sure 7, 8 quarterbacks I want to take over them. Definitely 4 wide receivers. So we're looking at about pick 13, 14 where I'm starting to consider it. Because, I mean, if you look at how the running backs have performed, so last year we had Jamar Chase had that nuclear season. He had 23 points per game, 23.7. And the top running backs, I mean, they had Bijan had 20, Gibbs had 21 compared to Puka, Amon-Ra, Jefferson were in 18. So these running backs were scoring a little bit more than those elite wide receivers outside of Jamar Chase. So that's kind of what makes me more open-minded to it because of how young and powerful they are. Still going to take them behind 4 or 5 receivers, but I think the 1-2 turn is a little rich. But like I said, around 201, 202 is where I'm starting to consider it, which maybe that's still 1-2 turn and yet for you, but second round is what I'm saying.
So not the beginning of that range, but near the end of the range, more or less. Personally, I am trying to trade out of those picks just because I think very often you can still get 3 firsts in a startup, or what you can eventually liquidate for 3 firsts, a first and a early third and like a second or something like that, or the 112, 201, because these guys are considered to be cornerstone assets by most. So if I'm sitting in that position to take them, where Bowers, the tier 1 wide receivers are off the board for us, the quarterbacks I'm interested are off the board, and I think this is probably the most valuable player on the board, I'm probably trying to trade back and acquire value because I think that they're pretty similar to what we'll probably define as tier 2 wide receivers for me. And if I can tier back a little bit, pick up even just a little bit and get a guy that I consider positionally equal value, that's probably the way I'm approaching this tier. And then price of pick. Let's set it at 3 random first. Do we prefer, if we have 3, well, if it's truly random, I think all of us are taking 3 random first. Let's say we have a random first and a couple playoff firsts. 2 playoff firsts and a random. I'll go JP first on this value one, then David.
I think at that price point, it probably gives me access to those tier 1 wide receivers, and I still prefer them. So I think I'm probably going to pass. Situationally, I could consider it, but I think in a vacuum, I'm going to take the 3 firsts.
Yeah, so is that 3 firsts buying or selling?
Why not answer for both, David?
Okay, sure, why not? Sell, almost certainly I would sell any of them for 3 firsts and then use one, if I had to, 2 of those first to buy that production back. Obviously, you don't get the longevity or the security, but that is how I still treat the running back position. Buying, that's really hard. I'd kind of rather just do what I just outlined. If I had the 3 first and I wanted a running back, I'd rather just go buy similar production for an older player and keep the flexibility of the extra first or 2 in my pocket. But I get it. I do. I mean, I think that's the price point. I don't even know if that gets them in every league.
It doesn't get them in every league. There are definitely leagues where you are not going to end up being able to acquire these players at those price points. 3 firsts, you're going to need to add a couple seconds to that to get it done in some leagues. And I think all three of our advice at that point would be if you're needing to add, I could consider paying like 2 guaranteed playoff firsts and 1 that I would bet makes the playoffs. So they're probably 3 late firsts. And if I have the ability to consolidate and I have an extra first after that, I'd consider paying it for these guys, but I probably wouldn't. Like, I think I'd go the route David would as well. So I think in general, these are guys we love having. JP, are you viewing these guys as a cornerstone on your roster? Because we just saw you make a trade. Let's talk about the trade you made, the players you have on the roster afterwards, and the idiot you fleeced.
Yeah, I do consider these guys as cornerstone assets. Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, they were outscoring the other elite wide receivers outside of Jamar Chase. And of course, Ashton Jeanty is just now entering his rookie season. So yeah, I mean, David and I, we had a trade. I got Gibbs, Kyler, and Devontae Adams. He got Nico Collins, CJ Stroud, Jaden Reed, and Justin. It was a year second, so it was a second that I thought would be a little bit later.
The 212. You can just call it the 212, JP.
Probably 209 to 212 is where I would project it. So, yeah, maybe 212. We'll see. But you haven't had great luck there. We'll see. But for me, I just think Nico, with his age, I was pretty interested to pivot to Gibbs because I know how good he was last year. And also, I do get a little younger, although it is the running back position. With it being 4-point passing touchdown, I was kind of wanting to get off Stroud for a little bit more upside, and that's why I went for Kyler there. But I mean, what was your thoughts of it, Justin? Because I still think Devonta Adams could be a wide receiver 2 this year. I think he was a wide receiver 1 for a lot of last season after he got traded.
Devontae Reed is a wash. Gibbs, Nico, I prefer Gibbs by a little bit. Kyler, Stroud, I prefer Kyler by a bit personally, but I know that on market it's pretty close. I think it's a fair trade all in all. Typically speaking, I prefer to have more liquidity in younger players, quarterback, wide receiver than RB. But in a start 10, the hammer that Gibbs is pretty comparable to the hammer Nico is. I think with your wide receiver room in the context of that league, not necessarily having guaranteed hammers outside of that. You have Rice, you're hoping to be a hammer. You have Ladd, if I remember correctly.
Amon-Ra.
You have Amon-Ra. You got one hammer in Amon-Ra. So I don't hate it, but I probably wouldn't have made the move because who is your RB1 on that team, JP?
Bijan.
And having 2 of these guys as your RB room, you're theoretically set. Right? You're theoretically set at RB. The only way that you're not is injury, right? So the construction is fun to have. Fun fact, I drafted Bijan and Gibbs their rookie year in that league and traded both of them away.
No, I drafted Gibbs and traded him to you pretty quickly.
Oh, sorry. I had both of them on my team at the start of the season, and I'm a lying liar who lies, apparently. So
I think I might have drafted Stroud too and then traded him. I could be wrong, but whatever.
It's not a roster construction I'm personally comfortable with. I don't mind having one of these guys, and the most rostered guy I have of these is Janty. I think I have 3 or 4 shares. I have 1 Bijan, and then kind of playing it like hero RB style, like you would redraft, where then you take like 3 or 4 guys that are probably our ungraphic tier 7 type of players, and you hope 1 or 2 of them stick, basically. But you feel like if this is my only running back, and then I have a lot of like fringe running backs, Tyjae Spears, Tony Pollard, Tyrone Tracy, Cam Scatterbo, guys that's like they're sharing mixed backfields, but if I start that guy and this guy, I have a good RB room. But 2 is too bold for me, David. Is that too bold for you as well?
In general, yes. I do have a team with Bijan and Janty, and I think I might keep it like that. I've toyed with floating one for an elite wide receiver, and if the opportunity arises, I'll probably make the move, but it's kind of fun to have that running back room. It'd be really fun to have a Bijan Gibbs one, so I do get that. I think this is a fair trade, and I think when you're trading with other people that spend as much time in this world as we do, most of the time it's going to have to be a fair trade to get it done. I felt like I had a little too much running back value. Gibbs wasn't my first choice to trade, but when I saw JP's roster, he wanted to trade Stroud for Kyler. That was the initial thing, was some sort of deal built around that. Thought, hey, why not shoot for the stack, kind of shoot big and see what happens. I had Devontae and Mike Evans. Evans was on my bench, so I just slide Mike Evans into my starting lineup. Jaden Reed is a bounce back candidate, but I don't need to count on him. I mean, I think it could backfire for either of us, sure, but I think it really helped us both out. It accomplished the goal I wanted, it accomplished the goal JP wanted. So I think overall it was a win-win. Happy we got it done for the price we got it done at.
All right. And David, do you have one other follow-up topic you still wanted to brush on before we move on to tier 2?
You don't have to spend too much time on it. I just think it's kind of a good thought experiment based on your question about where we take these running backs in a startup. How many non-quarterbacks are you taking above these guys in our standard 175 tight end premium?
Non-quarterback.
You taking McBride as well?
Personally, in a 1.75 tight end premium, I would. 5, probably. 4 wide receivers for sure. I'd struggle to take these guys over Amon-Ra, Puka, Brian Thomas Jr., but I think I understand taking them over them, and I would certainly trade those guys for one of these guys in certain leagues where I had the flexibility and the wide receiver firepower to. I think that's kind of a wash. I just wouldn't want to build that way. And then, so I'm at, let's call it 6 wide receivers, 2 of those guys, 2 tight ends, that's 8 players.
For non-quarterbacks, I think I'm at 5 or 6. I'm going to take Bowers, or tier 1 wide receivers, and then like guys like Amon-Ra and Puka are kind of on that fringe. But I feel very secure in these guys, honestly. I mean, Puka's he's been pretty hurt with injury. Amon-Ra's coming off the injury. Nico's had injury problems. So these guys are just top 10 picks, and I think they're just locked in. I think they're going to get extensions for sure. So I feel pretty good and for what they're given for hammers right now. I mean, Gibbs and Bijan, they're being drafted in the top 5 on underdog drafts right now. And I feel like I got 5 or 6 years, outside of something really bad happening.
Yeah, I think I'm at, 7 receivers, 2 tight ends. And I'm kind of on the fence on McBride, but I don't know. I think I'd probably take him over the running back, especially in a startup. The BTJ, Puka, Amon-Ra tier, I definitely prefer slightly. I could see on certain roster builds where you would move one of those guys for one of these 3 running backs. I do kind of think Nico is that tipping point. He's my next receiver up in that group. And just kind of piggybacked off that trade there, because in my mind, when I was doing the math on the deal JP and I did, basically Nico and Gibbs were the same, and then Stroud and Kyler were the same, but like slightly to his side, and then slightly to his side on Devontae versus Jaden Reed. So all 3 players kind of a slightly to JP's side, but that second just kind of bridged the gap, and it also got me the roster construction I wanted. So yeah, I think Nico's the tipping point for me in a startup. I'll probably take the backs, at least Bijan and Gibbs above Nico. At least that's how I feel today. If you ask me tomorrow, I might change my mind.
As is tradition. All right, so we've talked this one into a whole. Moving on to our tier 2 players. Tier 2 players, we're looking probably for about as much of one of these 2 things. As much youth and close to enough draft capital and potential ceiling, but without the confidence on the ceiling, or guys that we expect to truly, beyond a shadow of a doubt, be exactly in lockstep, if not above these guys in production. And who are those guys, JP?
We have Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane, and Omarion Hampton.
An interesting tier here. Pretty sure Hampton is my most rostered starting running back on an NFL team, so not including any RB out of 53 I have a lot of. But I don't have much of these other guys. I have 1 Saquon, 1 Achane. It's an interesting tier because Saquon, if I was a betting man, I would in redraft. I'd take him over any of the guys in tier 1 for sure. I can understand taking Bijan or Gibbs instead, but I'd take Saquon because same offensive situation that he had all year last year. So I think without an injury, there's no question he's going to be a top 6 RB and has a good chance at being the RB1 overall, although it's very hard to repeat. JP, you brought up some interesting points about Achane earlier. Can you go ahead and talk a little bit about some trepidation you have regarding him that obviously a lot of people do, and what actionable advice you'd give off that trepidation?
Achane, I'm pretty bullish on him, to be honest. I mean, last year, his splits with and without Tua were pretty drastically different. So a lot of this hinges on Tua, which if you ask Justin, then that's a pretty bad bet. But Achane, he came out the gate really hot. Tua, he missed weeks 3 through 7. But if you look outside of those weeks, I mean, Achane was on fire. And even with the Tua games being mixed into the results there, he was RB6 in points per game. And this is after the season coming out of his rookie year where he was RB5 in points per game. So that's 2 seasons in a row where he's bumping up right against the top 5 running backs. And this is also with them kind of managing his workload. His rookie year, he had 41% of snaps, and then this past season, he had 61% of snaps. So he's getting it done even a split backfield, which that's kind of the concern with him is because he's a little bit smaller. He missed time as a rookie. This year, he was healthy, and the offense for the Dolphins was really, really down. So I'm pretty bullish on the fact that even in a down year for the offense, he still is really, really good. And we know he has that explosive ability in the pass catching. So it seems like he's got the kind of the safety from week to week as well as the ceiling. So if the offense bounces back, I could see him finishing up there with those tier 1 guys potentially.
Yeah, I kind of think maybe the reason to be a little afraid of HN that Justin was alluding to is the Tua thing. Like, running backs already are injury prone, so now for HN's production to not only rely on him being healthy, but Tua being healthy, that's a little scary. I get that. I do think they added, what did they add, like Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers or something. So if they can get a decent backup out of that, I don't know if they will, but as long as their backup isn't horrible, I don't think we'll see nearly as big of a drop off. You know, if Tyreek Hill keeps going downhill, HN will probably get more opportunity. So yeah, I'm a big fan of his as well. It's kind of hard to buy at this price that I'm sure we're about to talk about, but it's also hard to sell him at that price. He's someone that I only have, I think, on one roster, but it's really hard to trade him. I haven't really tried, but he's someone that's hard to acquire at the price because of the injury risk, but he's also hard to trade because of the production.
And before we talk really about what we think about Hampton, let's just talk in general about that price since you segued us so well. If I'm buying these guys, I'd offer a random first that could go either way, and I think I'd be willing to tack on 2 seconds to it. I think I'd be willing to pay 2 late firsts. I don't think I'd be willing to pay more than either of those 2 things. Do you think that's getting it done very often? Is my first question.
I don't think so, especially with Hampton being 103, 104 in a lot of leagues. Like, usually people want at least 2 random firsts with maybe a little bit more, especially with Saquon coming off the year he did. He's going to be on a contender, and I don't think they're going to move off of it for that price. But maybe so if they're trying to turn to a rebuilder, and maybe they have a different view of those 2 late firsts.
Yeah, I think 2 firsts at least. Maybe 2 late gets it done, but I guess if your random has a heavy lead to being early, maybe then you don't need a second first with it. I don't think you're getting these guys for less than that. Maybe it's a first plus a different player or something, but I don't know that I'd pay 2 firsts for Saquon. I wouldn't. I know that, but I think that is the price.
But you are willing to trade 2 firsts for HN or for Hampton if you need RB, have the flexibility?
Yeah, given those 2 things, and I'm competing, then yeah, I think I would.
Well, God, we're not going to advise people to buy RBs if they're not competing, David. I mean, but definitely worth bringing up. If you're not competing, everything we talked about in Tier 1, transitioning from Tier 1 running backs to wide receivers in the Brian Thomas Jr., Puka Nacua range, that's the advice. Get that RB value into wide receiver value, get a 0 in your RB spot so you can tank. But these guys we definitely want on our team if we're competing. Hampton is my, I believe, most rostered running back, like I said previously. I have 5 or 6 shares in 15 or 16 leagues now, so about 33% rostership. A lot of exposure. I'm really betting the farm on this guy. I think in a Jim Harbaugh offense, they took offensive line last year in the first round. They let that offensive line, meld over the course of the year. I think it's going to come into this year better. A little bit more at wide receiver. I think Mike Williams will play that sacrificial X role well, and then maybe Harris will take that over at some point, or maybe they'll play him more of flanker. Not sure what they're going to do with him, but they have 3 wide receivers that I think can be NFL quality wide receivers, where last year I think we mostly felt like they had 1.5 quality wide receivers, something like that. Not to talk trash on Joshua Palmer. We'll talk trash on Quentin Johnson. So I think the offense is going to improve. I'm very interested in Hampton if I had to pick a buy out of this group. In general, these are guys we want only on competing teams. And in general, if you have one of these guys and you can get a tier 3 guy and a first, are we doing that every time? What about a tier 4 guy, although we haven't named them in a first? I'll bring it back up later. Are we interested in tiering off of these guys for a supposedly productive player at a first when we can, or do you think it really just depends?
I think that's always a good process. Obviously, it depends on who we're tearing down to, but if you can replace your running back production with similar point per game production and add a first, I'm almost always interested in that.
The only guy on this that I'm not personally that interested in doing that in is Hampton, just because I do think he has an ascension pathway with his age and his draft capital, but probably the right, especially because of my exposure, probably the right move.
Do you not think Chan has a shot at tier 1 then?
Maybe he does. I'd have to look at his age here, and he is 23.6. So he is the same age as Bijan and Gibbs. He should have a shot at it, and I guess if he finishes up there with him after this year, separating him from those 2 probably doesn't seem smart from a process standpoint, but I'm just betting against Tua in all things. You know that, David. All right. Anything else we want to talk about with these guys, or moving on to tier 3 for now, gentlemen?
Are you paying a first, Justin, to get from HN to Gibbs?
Hell no.
Fair enough.
What about from Saquon?
Hell yes. Because I feel like I'm getting 2 firsts of value for someone I don't value as 2 firsts. That is a great way to try to acquire players, is take somebody who is worth 2 firsts to the market that's worth a first and a half to you, because now you're paying 2 firsts and a second for somebody that you feel like is worth 3 firsts, but you don't want to pay 3 firsts. So, David, brilliant. Yes, of course. All right. So, moving on to tier 3. David, can you kind of define what we have in these young studs?
Well, way to bury the lead for me there. They're young studs mostly. A lot of upside, some question marks for sure. Do you think all three of these guys have room to move up at least one tier, if not both? You'll see which guy sticks out like a sore thumb. One of them is definitely descending as an asset, even though he might be my favorite in the tier. One more bad season from him, and he might be cooked as a high-end running back asset. So, yeah, but I think young studs is the way to define it.
And JP, who are those young studs?
We have Bucky Irving of the Bucks, Brees Hall of the Jets, and Travion Henderson now on the New England Patriots.
And kind of a smorgasbord all over the place of these players as far as what those question marks are. Henderson, it's just not really the best offensive line. It's improved a little bit from last year, hopefully, because it was, I think, the worst. Bucky, he's just going to be getting hit with draft capital questions until the cows come home. And then, of course, Brees, between injury and lackluster production based off of expectations last year, all these guys have the ability to drop to tier 4 or 5, easily be in tier 2 with consideration that maybe they should be in tier 1. I don't think Bucky can probably ever ascend to tier 1, in my opinion, just because of the draft capital. If he gets up to tier 1 valuations, I will absolutely be looking to move off of him personally. Call it slander if you want. I have a lot of Bucky Irving shares on my teams, and I'm going to win a lot of money off of Bucky Irving. But if he gets to the point where I can capitalize on value, I will sell him. Let's look at prices on these guys right now. I think we're pretty much all done with drafts for this year. So I think we can only really look at future draft. If we know for sure they're playoff firsts, are we considering throwing 2 playoff firsts at any of these players? Very hard thing to do.
No, I'm not doing that.
I agree.
If we have a first that we think leans towards early but can't be top 3, they probably will miss the playoffs, could sneak in. Of course, we need RB in this situation.
Oh, man. I still... If I really think it's missing the playoffs, I still think I'm probably leaning no for the flexibility for now. I could see doing it if I really, really have a big hole and I have an extra first or 2. But I think in a vacuum, I slightly lean to hold the first.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think right this second, I would consider doing it for Henderson in this situation. I think as we get closer and closer to games starting, I would be willing to do it for Bucky or Brees, but, in June, I don't feel rushed to make that decision. And if something does happen in the offseason to either of those two, I'd really hate to have spent, one of my biggest shots at helping my team. I know everybody's susceptible to injury, so, you can say that for everyone. I get that. But especially at running back, especially a guy like Brees Hall, who's already had a couple of ligament injuries, I want to be patient with those guys. I would even want to be patient with Henderson if I can, but I know he might get moved if the manager that has him is looking to move him. I also know he might jump in value if he starts having a really hot training camp. So, yes, fair value. I'm willing to pay that, but I don't want to pay it today.
All right. And then if we're paying that, then a truly random first that doesn't have that shot and a second, probably in a similar point of discomfort, so I think we've kind of owned in on a price here. What is the delta between these guys and tier 1? Are we willing to add a random first to any of these guys to get into tier 1, JP?
Yeah, random first, 100%. I definitely would, because I believe in their role long term a lot more, and I think that they're all going to score more points for sure this season.
David?
Yeah, if it's not my only first and I'm comfortable with the rest of my roster and I can invest further in my running back position, I would do that, yeah.
All right. I think that's probably the right piece of advice when we have the flexibility. Just hard to invest a first on top of a high-end asset at RB for me personally, but can't disagree with the fact that those guys have that job security on the book. In general, if this guy is your RB1, are you comfortable briefly, David, then JP?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have any of these guys as my RB1 right now. If it's Travion, I might be a little apprehensive, assuming I'm competing, just because I don't know what his early season will look like. But long-term, absolutely happy.
I'm fine with it, but not happy necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think I have many shares of these guys where they are my RB1s, but phenomenal RB2. And if they are your RB1, I think these are the types of guys that when they're my RB1, I want to have a Kamara, Henry, Mixon type to couple with them, the old with the young. And moving on to tier 4, since we kind of talked price, a little bit of strategy, we have some other guys that are young studs. We think they are. We've seen studliness from a couple of them. We think they have the potential to be studs. We view them a little bit above the rest of the young guys and some of the older, crustier guys. And who are those guys, David?
Yeah, first one, I'm not sure if I'd call him young, but I guess he's not old. Jonathan Taylor. Next one, Quinshon Judkins, and then Kyron Williams. We definitely spent a lot of time debating on this tier. I think it's a hard one with tier 5 to kind of sort through. And I thought we had a lot of good discussion there. So I don't know how we want to open this up. Some of the questions I have would involve tier 5. But, I guess Kyron is probably one that's good to talk about here. His production says maybe he belongs higher, but the other things say maybe he belongs lower.
And some of that production that says he belongs higher was not necessarily from last year either. I know JP likes to point out last year was more of a down year of production for him, but I think you and I personally view that as more anomalous and that his pretty close to workhorse usage, we expect it to continue in a good offense. So are you kind of giving his production history and not just a 1 year view in your opinion of him as a fantasy football asset, David?
We had 17 points per game last year, RB 10 points per game. I think, a couple of bad games in there that lowered it overall, but plenty of weak winners for you in there. A big question is his contract. If he gets that extension, I think his value will shoot up. I think he'll go at least to tier 3, probably tier 3 before the season.
If he had money, he'd be tier 3 for me.
Exactly. If they pay him in a way that makes us comfortable that he's going to keep the role, that's huge for him. They might not, but they also might do it before here. So, I don't mind buying in. I also don't mind selling because they've invested mid-round picks in the running back position each the last 2 years. Kyron has had some fumble issues, but man, he's been so productive in that role, and that offense is just great for fantasy. We love it when one guy can be McVay's workhorse. I'm happy to hold him where I have him. If I can trade him, I have shopped him around in a few places, but nobody really wants to pay this kind of value for him, from my experience at least. So I'm kind of holding. He's a really interesting guy to talk about and try and evaluate.
And what is that value for him or for this tier? My immediate thought that I'm going to ask you, JP, on is a truly random first. Nothing else.
I'm just going to preface this with all of these players in this tier are not guys I love. A random first, truly random first, I think I'm going to hold it. If it's late, I'll spend it.
Yeah, kind of like my cop-out answer in tier 3. I want to be patient, but I'm okay doing it. If I have the asset, I need the running back. I just want to wait until closer to the season. Maybe with Judkins, again, kind of like Henderson, where, I could see why you'd want to pull the trigger today instead of waiting. But I think that's a fair price. I will say I offered essentially Egbuka for JT in a league where a guy wanted to move a running back for a receiver and I wanted to go the other way. And basically I got laughed at, which I felt was weird.
Keep moving running back is looking to rebuild. I think I'd still need a little bit. I'd need like a 2-3 swap or something like that, or to go from JT to Egbuka. But I understand, like, were they going to rebuild or were they trying to compete with the roster still?
I think he's still competing. I will also say in this situation, just in case he watches, especially, the initial offer I sent, it was in the middle of a draft and I was going quickly. So my initial offer was missing a pick, but I quickly said that and he still was not interested at all. I was also trying to move up in the rookie draft, but if you take the picks out of it, it was a fair offer to move up. So it seemed to me like he thought it was comical that I thought Egbuka and JT were similarly valued, but I think they should be.
I think they're pretty close. Yeah. I just definitely could understand a team not wanting Egbuka unless you have. Ibuka's kind of like a mid to late first to me in the way I view him on a team. Like, he's liquid. He has the ability to go up in value more than a first, but also has more inherent risk. So I understand the concept, the premise there.
You guys know who had the highest snap share in the entire NFL at the running back position last year? It was Kyron Williams, and he was also averaging a touchdown per game. So that's the only reason why I was a little bit lower on him, was just because I think the snap share, if that comes down, his production could come down a little bit. If his touchdown rate comes down a little bit too, those are just two things I don't love. Also, it's the job security and how much Sean McVay loves Jarquez Hunter. Whatever, it's a 4th round pick. It might turn into nothing, but that clip, I just can't get it out of my head.
Coaches have never said one thing and meant another, or not. They've never praised the rookie before either. So that's a good point, JP.
Just rewind to last year and replace the name with Corum and tell me how that worked out. I get it, and I'm not saying nothing could happen. I'm just saying, like, Kyron's been his guy. He did score a lot of touchdowns, but he scored a lot of touchdowns his first year too. That role just has good touchdown upside. He could definitely see some regression. And certainly if the fumbles continue, I'm really worried. But now that we've seen it 2 years, I'm less worried than I was last offseason.
I think this is one of the tiers I'm most interested in buying into, just because I think Jonathan Taylor is a top 5 NFL running back, taking pass catching out of it. Nick Chubb in his prime-esque as a runner when he doesn't drop the ball at the goal line. Don't do that, Jonathan. Not good. Go Badgers. Judkins, I think, also has the ability to have that Nick Chubb type of, but I think also like Jonathan Taylor and Judkins both have some passing down upside, probably a little bit more than a Chubb, but nothing excessive. And Kyron, if he keeps the job he had last year or gets a contract on top of it, like I think is a value at this price point. So I think personally I'm pretty interested in this tier. Also still, of course, willing to tier down off of this tier, but I think this tier for sure. There's no way I can tier down off of this to anybody we're even going to have a picture of besides maybe Monty today and get a first. Like this, and it'd be for sure late probably in that situation. So because I'm only able to tier down off of these guys and maybe get like 2 seconds in like a guy below or a second in a guy below, like it's still not bad process, but I really do like these guys outcome. So pretty interesting tier for me personally. I know JP, you're lower on these guys. And then one last question: would we consider adding a late first to one of these guys to get to a tier 2 guy not named Saquon?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider it. I don't know if I would do it. I do like this tier, and I like my firsts, but in the right situation, I could see it. I think that's about the fair price.
Yeah, I don't feel any differently than David. I feel the exact same way.
All right, moving along to tier 5 then. It is a doozy. JP, you have to do this in haiku form. Please describe this tier.
Oh man, I don't even know what to say.
It's 575, right, for the syllables? Just so you know.
Oh wow, I was not prepared. No way can I do that on the spot. But this tier, it's just a lot of players that range from rookies to really old guys, and I think a lot of these players we're expecting to be top 24 running backs. So these are guys that you're going to be starting, but we have a wide range of career arcs for these guys. Now, David, who do we have here?
I was trying to write a haiku for this.
Let me try. I think I got it.
Okay, all right.
The 5th and 6th round of the start of draft season, these guys could suck too. I don't know. That's all I got.
All right. Well, one bad haiku is enough, so I won't even try mine. I was close, but yeah, long list here. Let's go for it. James Cook, Josh Jacobs, Kenneth Walker, Chase Brown, Caleb Johnson, RJ Harvey, CMC, Derrick Henry. Pretty much everyone here, I think, except CMC and Henry, we considered in tier 4 to at least some degree. I know there was a push for the first 3 guys specifically to put them up there, and we went back and forth a lot, and I think it got to the point where we just had to come to a decision. So I don't fault anyone for putting basically anyone in this tier in their tier 4 as well. But I just felt like personally those guys in tier 4 stood out a little bit from the rest of the guys here. So that's why I personally voted the way I did.
And let's go down the line here. I want you guys to unmute and say objection if you would not consider paying a late first for this player on an RB needy team. James Cook, Josh Jacobs, KW3, Chase Brown, Caleb Johnson.
That one's tough for me right now. I think as we get closer to the season, if it looks like he actually is the lead guy, I could see doing it. But today, I'm not sure if I would.
RJ Harvey, CMC.
Can't do it.
Can't do it either. Derrick Henry.
Definitely can't do it.
JP, do you disagree with any of those disagreements? Caleb Johnson, CMC, Derrick Henry?
I think just based on some upside and just how we view the Steelers offense, I'd be on the fence about it for Caleb Johnson. I think probably him and Derrick Henry would be the two I'd have the most pause about. I'm just a little bit higher on CMC, so I don't really disagree too much. It's pretty close.
And to be clear, I do think I like Caleb, and I think his upside is absolutely there. And it's most likely that he'll be worth at least the late first come start of the season, but just a few extra question marks that I'd want to be a little more patient there.
And these guys, the last guys that are probably worth a late first. So let's look at a little bit more macro view of the tiers so far, right? When I was talking about tier 2 earlier, before we had the graphics, we mentioned, potentially being interested in tearing down to tier 4 or tier 5 for a first, or I mentioned that. Are we still potentially interested in, we would mention we might be willing to pay late first to move up from tier 4 to tier 2. We also probably could have a team where we're willing to move down from tier 2 to tier 4 for that late first. We probably think that's a pretty fair offer if we need to split assets on an RB heavy team, or it's just the only way we can get more liquidity, soft rebuild for 1 year, whatever we're looking to do. Instead of a late first to go to tier 4, would we take a mid kind of random first to go to tier 5 RBs, or at least the RBs that we are most excited about in this tier?
This is my tier right here. There's a lot of guys I'm pretty high on, so yeah, my answer is yes for sure.
Yeah, tearing down from 2 to 5 for a mid first. I think pretty much not every single matchup like 1-to-1 there, but for the most part, yeah, in general, I'm interested.
If I switch that to late first, does that change your answer? If that's all you're netting on top of it, this is a probable buy team, JP?
I think for most guys, it does change the answer for. It's just Kenneth Walker and James Cook. I'm a little higher on. I thought belonged to tier 4, so I'm viewing that the same way. But everybody else, yes, I would change my answer.
I would take a late first to go from Saquon to anyone other than CMC or Henry. Probably, I would consider it for the other two, but I would probably stay put there.
Since this is the only big tier left, I haven't really asked this question about the price to move around within the tier, because I think for most of the other tiers, with the exception of we'd probably be willing to pay to move up off of Saquon to Achane or Hampton just because of the youth. Not a lot, but I'd probably be willing to tag on a couple thirds or a 2-3 swap onto him pretty readily. Within this tier, what is the price to move around when we're competing? Is there anybody in this tier that you would not take any other player in this tier in 2/3 to get? So is there any player A that you would not take any other player in this tier in 2/3 to get to sell?
Me personally, I would not sell these players for Henry in 2/3, but I didn't really think he belonged in this tier personally. Other than that, maybe situationally I don't do it sometimes, but yeah, for the most part, give me the extra thirds and I'll move between pretty much anyone else. CMC does scare me, so he's very situational, but they're kind of all the same after that.
So that CMC situation, you need to be able to afford to have him miss.
Yeah, to take the risk on. Yeah.
JP, I talk a lot already today. I'm going to ask you to summarize your take on Henry, why you and I agreed on including him in this tier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we just saw Derrick Henry get an extension from the Ravens, and I think that's just a big vote of confidence of the team in his role. I think that he's going to continue that. I mean, maybe he starts to drop off a little bit, but I thought that for a while with Derrick Henry, and he's just not seeming to change how he performs. But I mean, I just think he pairs really well with Lamar Jackson. Teams are frightened of Lamar keeping the ball, and I think that it just really helps the run game a lot when you have a guy this good who's that great on the goal line. I mean, shoot, if you just look at his points per game last year, 19.8. That's in a full PPR too, where he doesn't catch a ton of passes. And he's only 0.3 points behind Bijan. So, I mean, he was a top 5 running back last year. I think even if we see small regression, he's still going to be a top 10 running back. So I think you're going to get that for at least this year, maybe even a year or two after that if you're lucky. But I think he's might be a hammer this year. And the year after, I think he's on the fringe of that unless something serious happens.
Yeah, I was listening to Dynasty Domain on YouTube. They're part of the Flock Fantasy family. And they were going over his snap percentage numbers last year, and he was at about 55% of the snap, which if they're using him like that and the way he takes care of his body, I think he's just different. As the youth, my students always say, he's just built different, mister. So like I think he's just gonna hold up better than anything we've ever seen before. And I think we're gonna have some more crazy production from him. I definitely would prefer everybody else in this year to him. I would not in a vacuum besides maybe CMC, just because I think CMC has so much risk, and I just would love to make the value something that I think has a better chance to last longer. However, James Cook, if he goes somewhere else, how sure are we that James Cook is going to be that good for fantasy and somewhere where he's not in one of the best offenses in the league? Josh Jacobs, they can move on from him after the year. Chase Brown, I mean, there's a lot of other question marks everywhere else. If we're truly looking at this in like a 1 to 3 year window, like, yeah, there's more risk because he's older, but it's not absurd that he's kind of in the same conversation of sort of a late first of value. I would love to get better longer term, what I feel like is longer term better value. But to be honest with you, like I'm much more likely to try to throw Derrick Henry in 2 seconds at Judkin, or Derrick Henry and a first at Bucky or Brees to try to get RB. If I want to stay RB and feel better about it, this isn't the tier for me to feel good about it. This is a tier that I think I expect some production from, but then I'm like, I'm not necessarily that sold on anybody in this tier past this year. Johnson and Harvey are interesting because they're so young, but also I'm not entirely confident in them as players. So like it's kind of, well, this is your tier, JP. For the most part, this is my tier to avoid.
Justin, what's kind of interesting with like the Chase Brown part of it is like when you look at Derrick Henry, CMC, I know you're a little lower on CMC, but who do you feel more confident in their role? Not for this coming season, but for next year, Derrick Henry or Chase Brown? you know?
For 2 years from now, you mean?
Yeah, for 2026, not this season, but next.
Henry, if he's healthy, I think will be a better asset than Chase Brown that year. Henry, if he's healthy and hasn't hit the age cliff. But I think the hitting the age cliff question versus Chase Brown's job security is equal risk. So wash, net neutral. And I think Chase Brown will be somebody I want to have on a fantasy football roster for 4 more years at least. 5 more
Right.
years probably,
I
even if
just
he doesn't have the same role.
when you look at the market for redraft, just Derrick Henry, he's going like a full round or 2, round and a half ahead of Chase Brown. So yeah, when you weigh the upside of Chase Brown 3-4 years from now, I think that helps balance it out, and why I think Derrick Henry belongs in the same tier.
Yeah, and I think it honestly would be a good episode to do at some point about talking about appetite for players dying on our roster, because at this point a Derrick Henry buy is a buy with the intention of letting him die on your roster. So how do we construct to do that? How do we plan to do that? I think would be a good conversation, because I think that's why David's very uncomfortable with him in large part, is because of spending something in this price point to die on your roster is it's not something we want to do in a whole. You need to have a loaded team to be willing to do that.
Yeah, also, he could have already fallen off the age cliff and we just don't know it. I agree. He's built different, obviously. He's already proved that, though, because he's already 31. I think it's always good process to pivot from one of these guys, even CMC you could throw in there, from a guy who's could already be useless and we're just not aware of that, to someone in this price range. Yeah, I think that's always going to be a good process. So just quickly on that, but you asked the question about James Cook. I think we want to address too. How do we feel about him if he's on a new offense? I think he's similar to Kyron in that we really want to see that extension come through. It would make us feel a lot better. I kind of think it's going to come through for both of them to some degree. It might not be as much guarantee as we hope, so there might still be some question marks. But yeah, him moving an offense, there's just a ton of unknown there. He was, huge touchdown upside. He fits that offense very well for what they want. Is the new place he goes to, are they going to have touchdown upside? Are they going to use him correctly? I don't know. He scares me because of that contract. I just feel a little bit better about Kyron's ability to get that contract. I also feel like I know Kyron has been a little more productive. That's why they're separate tiers for me. But I know there was a strong case to put him in tier 4. So yeah, I think that was a good question, and I think we really hope he resigns in Buffalo.
We've seen teams how they value speed. We saw Scatabo and like Bucky Irvin, these guys fall when they're not fast. And I think that if James Cook hits the market with his pass catching and his speed and everything, I personally feel a little bit better about him on another team than Kyron.
Fair enough. Don't want to make this video go for an hour and a half though, so I'm going to move along to tier 6. Probably best said as about an early second. Probably the easiest way to describe this tier. If we were talking price points, some crusty vet, some middle of the road as far as their career arc goes, and a little youth in this tier. We've got Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, David Montgomery, and Cameron Scatabo. I want it to be Cameron. I don't know. It sounds fun. Definitely a couple guys here that, looking at the names, Kamara, looking at Mixon here, I definitely understand your argument of having Henry in the same tier as those guys, David. You might be right. Is that basically just your big argument, is how do you separate him from Kamara and Mixon?
Yeah, I mean, look, we do our tiers in kind of a weird way. We just go tier by tier, and there's 2 out of 3 of us. So if we disagree, we put it to a vote. And if they're in, they're out. They're in. If they're out, they're out. I would have formatted tier 6 differently, or I would have advocated for that if Henry was in it. I don't know that Cam Scatabo, maybe not David Montgomery, maybe even not Joe Mixon. It might have just been Kamara and Chuba and Henry for me as a tier. But yeah, separating Henry and Kamara is very difficult. They've both been very productive. They're both aging, but I think it's more likely that Kamara has an extra year or 2 under of production left in the tank than Henry does, in my opinion.
Yeah, what differentiates these guys for me is if you just look at people's expectations where all the money is, like I referenced underdog, Derrick Henry, he's still going at the 1-2 turn, and Kamara and Mixon, they're both being drafted about like RB 18 to 20, which that's a big difference. They're being drafted as a middle RB1 compared to a middle RB2. So I think that's based on offense, because we know the Ravens are going to score a lot of points. And I think that's really just what differentiates these guys, because I feel like these guys have 1 to 2 more years. Like you said, there might be a little bit more upside with Mixon and Kamara to get an extra year, but I think there's just a lot more upside for fantasy points this year for Henry, and probably next year as well.
And on that approximate price point, let's call it a early second next year. Is that something, if we need RB, we have that to spare? It's not ours, obviously, or we're not buying RB, but we have a second of a rebuilding team, could be the 201, could be the 204, but certainly not making the playoffs. Stop me if you're not willing to offer that for this player. Alvin Kamara. All of them, David?
An early second, man, I'm going to hold it. And here's my reasoning. I'm willing to pay it for some of these guys, but I don't think a single team out there in the Dynasty world is one of these guys away from competing. So if I'm making a move today to buy a running back, it's because I'm taking my team from somewhere where I feel like I have a giant hole to now where I'm competing. That's why I'm willing to pay, potentially pay a first for some of these guys we were talking about earlier. Pay an early second right now for one of these guys, I just don't see the point.
I think it could be 201 to 203, I'm probably not sending it for this tier either. Maybe if I see it 204 to 206, I think if that's the way I project it, then I could see sending it for all these guys. But yeah, if I think it's going to be that high, I think I'm holding that second.
Even for Chuba, who I've seen go in the 6th of startup drafts.
That's spicy.
I mean, I'm not drafting him there.
I will say with these guys, I think it's not an unfair question. And in season, if I am competing and I find out that, whether it's due to injury or someone not producing the way I expected, then I'm much more willing to pay that price to replace. But there's so many questions right now, not only about these players, but about your league, about how your team's actually going to play, that I'm not very interested in using an asset to get a guy,
Yeah, I just think it's a question of if Kamara is or Mixon is doing RB1 things next year, will this early second be able to buy them? Same with Chuba. If Chuba is doing RB1-ish things like he was doing last year, will an early second be able to buy him? So I guess it's just a question of if it's a random second and a random third, how different is that from an early second? Are you willing to pay that more likely, David? Is it the early second that's killing you?
If the price is right, I'll buy anyone at any point. I think the early second for me, we've seen in the last at least few drafts, I don't know if this is necessarily a trend or if I've just built it up in my head, but in the last few drafts, there's typically 13 to 15 guys that we end up really liking. And I don't mean like loving, obviously, but like you saw Ladd in some seconds last year. We've seen, I think to 203 this year is about where we were happy. So I'm going to hold on to that early second if I can, especially if I really believe it's going to be an early second. I treat it a little differently than a mid-second and a mid-third.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's where Ladd, Bo Nix were going this year. You could see Golden, Caleb Johnson, those guys who there's a good chance you could get a first for them if there's just a puff piece, that people get excited about. So yeah, that early second, I do value pretty highly for those 201, 202 specifically. But if it's random and I think it's going to be a middle second, I think that's where the excitement's a lot lower. So yeah, I would tack on a third to a random second.
All right. And I think that kind of wraps up our tiers as we have them. We're going to talk a little bit about the tiers that we don't have on this screen then. So there's a lot of players outside of here. We did not put together a tier 7, but starting at 107 on keep trade cut, my idea for tier 7 would be that it's worth, call it what you will, a guaranteed playoff team second, like a guaranteed buy team, like a super team second, maybe it's 2/3, maybe it's a 2-3 swap, something in that range, right? These guys are not super valuable, but they're crusty, and they're a lot of the guys that I like to roster. So I'm going to go down keep trade cut starting at 107 with Zach Charbonnet. And I want you guys to stop me when you think someone doesn't belong in this. So Charbonnet, Brian Robinson, DeAndre Swift, James Conner, Trey Benson.
I don't know if he belongs.
Yeah,
I get it.
I don't know if I mentioned him ahead of. Did I already read James Conner? I did.
Yeah, they were back to back.
Yeah, I'm reading. I don't know how to listen to myself and read at the same time, just like my students. Isaiah Pacheco, Tyrone Tracy, Bashal Tutin, Travis Etienne.
Etienne he's right near the cusp.
Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones, and now we get into Jaden Blue.
I think this is where I'm going to start disagreeing a lot.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed as my cutoff line more or less before the episode last year, was Jaden Blue probably was my point, kind of that cutoff line. I think Trey Benson, like you're saying, David, is a asset-wise, he's a lot like Zach Charbonnet, except I think we've seen that Zach Charbonnet can do it at an NFL level. And Trey Benson, we've just seen that he can do it at a draft capital level.
We're also unsure of how Seattle's offense is going to use Walker and Charbonnet. We expect Walker to definitely get the majority of the work, but if Charbonnet also has like flex value, even when Walker's healthy, that really helps, especially compared to these guys that we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess two other questions that we'll kind of call it off here. Who is your favorite guy in this tier? If everyone can just pick one guy to target, assuming you could get them all at the same price, because the cheapest is probably the cheapest that is a good buy at a rebuilder is my answer on a rebuild. The cheapest that's a good buy at a contender is my answer on a contender. But if they're all the same price, David, who would you want to target here?
I feel really gross saying it because I was not a fan of his last year at his price point, but the fact that he had that value at one point, Pacheco gets his job back and it looks like it's his job again. I think he'll definitely rise up the rankings and give you a good sell window, and if you don't sell him, hopefully he'll give you some production. I think Pacheco's the guy who stands out to me in this group, honestly.
JP?
I was going to say Pacheco too. I think when you look at the running back room, I mean, they have Kareem Hunt, Elijah Mitchell, Rashard Smith. Pretty sketchy for an offense that could easily be back in the top 12 this year. So I think he definitely stands out. If I had to pick another one, it would be a guy who I think has at least a chance to be like a top 20 guy, and that's Tony Pollard. He's 28. He's a 3-year contract, entering year 2 of it. So he might give you some solid production. If Cam Ward outplays expectations and lifts that offensive ceiling, maybe even then Tony Pollard could be a middle RB2, but he could be the lead guy with also explosive ability and pass catching. So he would be the guy that sticks out to me.
And I would go with probably DeAndre Swift. Nick Chubb just signed with the Texans today. That was a big one that people were connecting to Chicago. Monangai. I mean, I like Monangai a lot. He's one of my most rostered any RB out of 53s. Rookie from Rutgers. Might be saying his name wrong.
Just a guy.
Just got him. Oh, fudge. Yeah, so just a guy. It could be better than the linebacker that they had taking goal line carries in one game last year because they didn't trust anyone on their current roster. They did that once. Obviously, different coaching staff, dysfunctional coaching staff, but yeah, going to be interesting. So that would be the guy that I would take. And is there anybody in here that's a big tear down target for you guys, like that you're trying to tear down off of RBs that we've talked about before? Let's look at a tier 5 running back, perhaps, that you might be trying to tear down to one of these guys. If you're trying to compete, who is not looking at value or anything, but like, do you guys have a favorite target in this group, or is that the same question I just asked?
I think it's the same question.
Then I'm just going to cut all that out. And the last question I'm just going to ask real quick then is Trey Benson, Zach Charbonnet, this type of player. Do you guys like holding those types of players on your roster, or are you trying to liquidate them any chance you can for a second?
I mean, I like holding them, but yeah, I want to hold them to wait for the right time to sell them for the most part, or to start them depending on my roster construction. But I think a second, yeah, if I can get a second today, sure, let's do it.
I think I'm holding to either get production from a guy like Charbonnet, or I'm holding until I can get a second. So yeah, I'll take that second whenever I can get it for these guys who I don't think have a ton of upside.
All right. I had more fun talking RB than I usually do. Nice to see all the youthful infusion. Feel like it's a deeper position than often. We'll see how that actually plays off. Famous last words, especially when it comes to tight ends. Deeper position than often. Nope, never is. But it feels that way for the RBs. So fun conversation. So thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dyno Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dyno Construction Podcast, until next time.